A very good afternoon, all my dear students. How are you all? I hope you all are happy and healthy and you all are studying hard for your exams. So I can see a number of students have already joined. Anubhav, Banu, Aditya, Rishita, others also I can see a number of students. Rishita, I'll just take up your doubt. So students, I hope that the topic that we have covered for chapter number 3 in the last session, that is still page number 3.16, right? So I hope that you have gone through that particular pages from your module, right? And today I'll be starting with understanding the entity and its environment on page number 3.24. Essay 320, I'll be taking up in the next session, right? So in continuation to what we were doing in the last session, I'll be continuing with essay 315, right? So I'll come directly to page number 3.24 after page number 3.16 that we have covered in the last session. So let me just share my screen. So I hope students, your queries are resolved. Aditya is saying good afternoon. Anubhav saying good afternoon. So sampling risk, whose doubt is this? Let me just have a look. Rishita. So Rishita, what is your exact doubt? If you can just message me your doubt. Rishita, message me both your doubts. Specify the queries clearly. So I'll be starting with what? Essay 315 that we were doing in the last session also. So what is the name of the essay? Identifying and assessing the risk of material misstatement through understanding the entity and its environment. So whenever we are saying understanding the entity and its environment, so understanding entity and its environment without looking at the module or your study, just tell me what do you understand by the entity and its environment? So my question is more specifically with respect to the environment. Entities, environment, what all will be covered in that? So quickly send in your replies. External factors, Mehak is saying. Then Prem Kumar is saying management and its business. Okay. Others also please reply. Nature of work. Right. So as per essay 315 student, there are 5 points that covers entity and its environment. So I'll just first briefly just tell you as to what these are and then we'll discuss each one of them in detail one by one. So first is relevant industry, regulatory and other external factors, including the applicable financial reporting framework. So this is with respect to the external factors plus the applicable financial reporting framework. Second is nature of entity, which includes the entity's operations, the ownership and governance structure, the types of investments, the structure of the entity and how the same is financed, right? Then third is the accounting policies, whether these are appropriate and consistently applied year on year basis. Fourth is the entity's objective strategies and related business risk. And last but not the least is measurement and review of financial performance, right? So let me just take you through the module for the explanation of these. Just a minute. So we are on page number 3.24 of your module. Let me just open the other file. So see, first is your relevant industry, regulatory, other factors, including the applicable FRF, right? So when we say relevant industry factors, so these can be like the demand supply, the supplier and the customer relationship, the competitive environment of the organization, right? Technological developments, if any, right? Whether the entity is engaged in seasonal activities, because see, this is going to have an impact on the profits of the organization. Let's say an entity is there which is manufacturing crackers, so the sales will be more near the Diwali time, right? So whether it is engaged in seasonal activities, so you can see relevant industry factors includes customer supplier relationships, the competitive environment, the technological developments, the seasonal activities, right? Then relevant regulatory factors, this will include the applicable FRF and the legal and political environment, right? Like the taxation, the government policies, or any industry specific regulations that are there. So taxation, government policies, or environmental requirements affecting the industry and the entity's business, right? And then we said other external factors. So other external factors can be like general economic factors like your interest rates, right? The economic conditions, availability of finance, right? So other external factors can be these points like general economic condition, interest rates, availability of financing, and the inflammation, etc. Right? So students, why I'm taking this topic from a module? Because see, how clearly it is mentioned here. So if you just mark that these are the relevant industry factors, then you mark here that these are the regulatory factors, and then these are the other external factors, right? And for the purpose of preparation for your examination, you can just learn the points as are given in your module. Few points you can learn with respect to each of the three criterias, right? So this was with respect to the external factors. Now, nature of the entity. This is one of the internal factor, right? So nature of the entity includes what? Its operations, the input output, like what are the raw materials, what are the output, uh, what is the output, what are the byproducts, right? The ownership governance structures, types of investment that the entity is making, and investments in any special purpose entities. So whether any entity has been incorporated for the specific purposes. For example, like companies in the northeastern states, so where they have various factories, so it do happen that they incorporate entities, and the very purpose of those entities is to generate electricity for the parent company. So the specific purpose is what? To generate electricity for captive consumption, right? So special purpose entity that are incorporated for specific purpose. The example that I gave uh, is just one of the specific purpose, and the way the entity is structured and how is it financed. So see how the entity is financed, how is it important for an auditor. See, if the company is financed by way of debt, then auditor focus area will be on the interest amount, right? The principal repayments, right? And if the entity is financed through equity, then dividend, then there will be no interest payments as such. Then auditor's focus area will be on dividends. So all these factors help the auditor in obtaining the understanding of the entity. So this is the entity, and the earlier point was its environment, right? And in fact, environment will include internal environment as well as the external environment, right? Further, whether the entity is having any complex structure, like whether there are any subsidiaries. So all these things will come under this point of the nature of the entity. So what are the various matters that the auditor may consider while obtaining understanding of the entity, the nature of the entity? So the business operations, investments and investment activities of the entity, the financing and the financing activities, and financial reporting like the accounting principles, the revenue recognition practice, right? So all those factors which are internal to the organization. So we have read 2 points. What first is what? The relevant industry regulatory and other external factors, including the applicable FRF. And the second point is relating to the nature of the entity. You can like always get a 3 marker or 4 marker question that you have been asked to obtain the understanding of the entity and specifically with respect to the nature of the entity, right? Or let's say the external factors. So what all will you consider? So a 3 or 4 mark question can always come out of these 2 points. Then the next point is the selection and application of accounting policies. And you have been doing it since long that when we talk about the accounting policies, so we as auditors, like basically we are concerned whether the accounting policies that have been adopted are appropriate and whether they are consistent year on year basis. So the appropriateness and the consistency we have to look upon. Then the entity's objective, strategies, and the business risk. So, like for learning, I call it as ORS, objective, risk, and the strategies. So, students, understanding of the objectives, the strategies, and the risk of the entity is also helpful for the auditor to obtain an understanding of the entity's environment, right? So see, what is the purpose why we are obtaining such all these understanding? Because we have to identify and assess the risk of material misstatement, right? So see, the entity works with the external factors as well as with the internal factors as we have studied in point number 1 and 2, right? In order to respond to these factors, entities, all the entities have their certain kind of objective, right? And in order to meet those objectives, they make strategies, right? And the entities are in whatever business they are or in whatever industry they are, there are certain kind of risk that the entity is exposed to. So that is why these objectives, these strategies, and these risks are required. The understanding of these objective strategies and risk is required by the auditor for understanding the risk of material misstatement. And also students see when we talk about the business risk, right? So it may happen that many of the business risks have a financial impact on the organization, right? So let's say, for example, the entity is operating in an industry, for example, a mobile manufacturing company is there. So technology plays a very important role. So the one of the most important business risk that this company faces is what? Technology upgradation, or if it is not able to cope up with this technology upgradation, then it may have an impact on its going concern. Now, it may have what? A financial impact, and then this business risk will become what? Risk of material misstatement. So it is not necessary that all business risk will convert to risk of material misstatement. But see, it is mentioned here that I'm reading this paragraph. See, an understanding of business risk facing the entity increase the likelihood of identifying the risk of material misstatement, since, very important, business risk will eventually have financial consequences and therefore an effect on financial statement. However, the auditor does not have a responsibility to identify and assess all business risks, because all business risks give rise to risk of not all business risks give rise to risk of material misstatement. I hope it is clear. I gave you example of technology development. So this may have an impact on the going concern, which is of a concern for the auditor also, right? Is it clear? So when the auditor is obtaining an understanding of the objectives, the strategies, and the risk, what can be various examples that the auditor is obtaining understanding of? So the industry development, right? A potential related business risk might be, for example, that the entity does not have the personnel or expertise to deal with the changes in the industry. So take example of this mobile company only. New products and services. So let's say the company has launched any new product or services and it has given, let's say, 5 years, 6 year, 20 years warranty in order to promote that product. But there is financial implication with respect to this. So this is again one of the risks. Expansion of the business and that the demand has not been accurately estimated, right? So the company has expanded the business, but it is not supported by adequate demand, right? So this is again one of the example of business risk, right? So I hope this point of objective strategies and risk is clear. So first is the relevant industry, regulatory, other factors, including the applicable FRF. Then is the nature of entity, including its operations, ownership and governance structure, types of investment, and the way the company is structured and how is it financed. Then is the entity's accounting policies, selection and application and changes हैं, what are the reasons. Then the entity's objective strategies and associated business risk, right? And the last point is measurement and review of entity's financial performance, right? So this point basically says that, see, when the auditor has to obtain an understanding as to what are the performance measures, whether external or internal, with respect to any entity, right? Because if, let's say, the company has certain targets that it has to meet it, right? If you remember, we discussed an example, I think, in the last chapter, that the company has to get its shares listed in the BSE in the next year. So it may have a pressure to inflate its profits, and it may show what fake revenue. Remember, we discussed this example. So same way, when the company has any pressure, so see, there can be two things. Either the management will improve the business performance, or the other way can be it will manipulate the financial statements, right? So in order to understand what is the management philosophy with respect to the measurement and review of performance, auditor needs to have an understanding of the performance measure, right? So it says that these pressures in turn may motivate the management to take action to improve the business or to misstate the financial statement. Accordingly, an understanding of entity's performance measure assists the auditor in considering whether the pressure to achieve performance target may result in management actions that increase the risk of material misstatement. So I gave you these examples. For example, the company has to, has certain targets with respect to sales. Now, either it will be motivated to put efforts, or the other way can be manipulation of financial statement, that is showing fake sales, Hana. So auditor needs to consider that. So what can be the various measures, examples of measuring and reviewing financial performance? It can be like your various ratios, your gross profit ratio, right? Your current asset ratio, financial and non-financial ratios, right? Period on period financial performance analysis, comparing it with the trend, or budgets forecast variance analysis, right? Or the credit rating agency reported. So there are various credit rating agencies. So their reports can also be used by the auditor for obtaining the information about the performance measures of the company, right? So these are the 5 points. Now I'll just have a look at your queries and then we will proceed further. Please tell me, do you have any doubt with respect to this topic, or is it clear? Rishita, I'll take up your doubt relating to assertion at the end of the session. Just remind me. So Priyanka is saying clear, Rishita is saying clear. Others also please reply. Tanvi saying clear. So now who was saying ki ma'am, please tell me how to prepare, Hana? Ayushi. See, students, what happens is just have a look at this topic. Now, writing with respect to all these 5 answers in one question is difficult, is like not, it will not be asked that you are required to give explanation with respect to all these 5 points. Now, how to prepare this question if you just look at this topic only? So first of all, though, you should be able to remember all these 5 points. Now, what is the technique? You should have in your mind that first point was relating to external factors, second is internal, third policies, fourth ORS, and fifth is the performance measures. पहले तो a brief you can say a flowchart kind of thing should be there in your mind, that the moment you get the question with respect to understanding entities and environment, these 5 points should flash in front of your like eyes. You should be able to remember, right? Now, suppose you are asked about the first point in detail, relevant industry, regulatory, and other factors. So, the way I told you, it is divided into three parts: relevant industry factors, regulatory factors, other external factors, along with what? Applicable FRF. So, with respect to these three, you should be able to learn few points like competitive environment, supplier customer relationship, technological development, seasonal activities. So, I'm just telling you what the keywords, and this is the way you will be able to remember also, right? Relevant regulatory factors. So relevant regulatory factors may applicable FRF, legal and political environment will come. Then direct supervisory activities, taxation, government policies, है ना? Environmental requirements affecting the industry and its business. Other external factors is your general economic factors like interest rates, availability of financing, inflation, right? So this is the way you should be able to remember the keywords. Now, how to remember? So I have just discussed this topic from your module. And the purpose, the very purpose of discussing it from the module is that you should be able to make your own notes, right? So the way I have highlighted, you should highlight the keywords. First of all, you should go through the entire topic. Word by word, you should read. And then in the second reading, you should highlight the keywords. Same way, nature of entity here. So these 4 points you should remember. Along with that, see complex structure, whether it has subsidiaries, and few examples, right? And these examples are so easy: investment activities like capital investment, financing or financing activities. So you may be asked a 4-mark question with respect to these examples only. So there, when you are asked to give examples with respect to the nature of entity, then you are required to write these examples, right? So this is the way you need to prepare this particular topic. So if you just ask me, so with respect to this particular topic, you should prepare like this. So tell me whose doubt was it? Ayushi, I think. Ayushi, is it clear? Is it clear? ठीक है. So this was the topic of understanding the entity and its environment. So if I ask you that why an understanding of the entity and its environment is required, tell me, why is it required? So the understanding of the entity and its environment is required so that it will help the auditor in planning the audit and identifying areas that require special attention. And we have studied in chapter number 2 that without gaining the proper understanding of the client's organization and a proper audit plan cannot be developed, right? Simple. Now, is understanding of the entity a continuous process? Quickly send in your replies, yes or no. Is it a continuous process? So Anubhav, Priyanka are saying yes. Others also, Bhanu, Ayushi, Yash, Nisha, Tanvi, absolutely correct. So it is a continuous process, right? So this topic says that what are the areas where such understanding of the entity and its environment will be needed. So first and foremost, the understanding of the entity, it is a continuous process, right? And these are the various areas where the auditor, when he's, let's say, first point, when he's assessing the risk of material misstatement, he wants an understanding of the entity and its environment. So, just a minute. So this is to clear. So this point should be clear because we are studying about SA 315 only. And the name says understanding and identifying and assessing the risk of material misstatement through understanding the entity and its environment. So first point is clear: assessing, while the auditor is assessing the risk of material misstatement, such understanding is required. Then, while the auditor is determining materiality in accordance with SA 320, then also such understanding is required, right? When the auditor is considering the appropriateness of selection and application of accounting policy, again, this is required. Identifying areas where special audit consideration would be necessary. Then also, for example, in order to understand related party transaction, appropriateness of management's use of going concern assumption. So all these the understanding about entity and its environment, the 5 points that we have read will be required. Developing expectations for use when performing analytical procedure. This I'll be taking up when we will be doing SA 520. And then evaluating the sufficiency, appropriateness of audit evidence obtained, such as appropriateness of assumption and management oral and written representation. Again, auditor will require the understanding of the entity and its environment. Is it clear? Is this topic clear? Do one thing. Go through illustration number 4. I'll just stop sharing my screen for once. Uh, Meanwhile, you just go through illustration number 4. Just give me a minute. Yes, this illustration number 4. The auditor of ABC Textiles Limited chalks out an audit plan without understanding the entity's business. Since he has carried out many audits of textile company, there is no need to understand the nature of business of ABC Limited. Advise the auditor how he should proceed. So it says that the auditor of ABC Textiles Limited. So this is a textile company, and they believe that since they have conducted the audit of a number of textile companies, so such an understanding is not required. So the obtaining understanding of the entity and its environment, including entity's internal control, is a continuous dynamic process of gathering, updating, analyzing information throughout the audit. So the auditor should proceed accordingly. That is, he should obtain the understanding of such textile business, right? Illustration number 5. While auditing the books of accounts of Heavy Material Limited, a team member of auditor of the Heavy Material Limited showed no inclination towards understanding the business and business environment of the above mentioned company. Is the approach of team member of auditor of Heavy Limited correct? Give your reason. So, similar questions. So, it is not correct. Why? Because planning the audit and identifying areas requiring special attention during the course of audit required the understanding of the client's business. I hope these two questions are clear. Very simple questions. Again, go through or do this as for homework, illustration number 6, right? Is it clear? Okay. Now we'll be starting with the concept of internal control. So we have studied about internal control a number of times, and I have given you very basic example also with respect to internal control, whereby I give you example of. So Abhi, I'm not giving you example of internal control with respect to financial statement as such. But if you remember, I gave you example that CCTVs, right, or the biometric devices, right? Or when you enter the malls, the metal detectors. So these are what the internal control. Or if you talk about the internal control relating to the account, so let's say let take take the example of traveling expenses. So when the company or the entity has an internal control that with respect to traveling expenses, if the amount is up to rupees 10,000, that will be sanctioned, that will be paid on approval of one authorized signatory, but an amount exceeding rupees 10,000, that will be signed, that should be approved by two authorized signatories. So these are what? Internal control only, right? So now we will understand the internal control in terms of again SA 315, right? So I hope by now, so you must have learned the name of SA 315? So if I can get replies from your side without looking at the module, just tell me what is the name of SA 315? Send in your replies. Write the entire name. I told you that whenever students ask me that, ma'am, whether we should write the essays number and the essays name, so I always tell them it's better if you write the essay name and essay number, but that should be correct. Writing incorrect essay number or name is not recommended, right? So students are able to like get as to what is the context of SA 315, because see, many of you are saying identifying and assessing risk, or you are saying identify and assessing the risk of material misstatement, but the entire name I want. So identifying and assessing the risk of material misstatement through understanding the entity and its environment. Mehak, you are absolutely correct, right? So the definition of internal control as per SA 315. So SA 315 says, so see, this is clear to you that there are financial statements, right? With respect to the proper preparation and presentation of financial statements, the accounting and every financial process which is involved, or every process that is involved in preparation of financial statement, the organization is what? The management of the client organization, it implements the internal control. So, do we as auditor, are we required to give our opinion on the internal control as such? So the answer is no. So why are we discussing about internal control? Because based upon our understanding of internal control, we will decide as to whether to rely on internal control or not, and we'll decide the nature, timing, extent of our substantive procedures, right? Substantive procedures abhi ke liye samjho that checking the financial statements, right? So that is why we are understanding the internal control. Now, so this is clear. This is designed, implemented, and maintained by the client organization, not the auditor. So it is a process. So DIM, I have written is it in short form, but it means design, implemented, and maintained by those charged with governance, management, or other personnel. So in short, I'll say that it is the client, right? So it is the process which is designed, implemented, and maintained by those charged with governance, management, and other personnel. Why? So this definition has nothing to do with to achieve auditor's objective, no, but to achieve the entity's objective, right? So to provide a reasonable assurance. Why term reasonable here? Because we are going to study further that again there are inherent limitations of internal control the way we have studied for audit. So audit maybe though we have studied not that with respect to audit we have studied that auditor obtains reasonable assurance. Why? Because of inherent limitations of audit. So here also why reasonable assurance? Because of inherent limitations of internal control, right? So I'll repeat these 3 points. So as per SA 315, internal control is the process designed, implemented, maintained by those charged with governance, management, and other personnel to provide reasonable assurance about what? So I told you, no, this has nothing to do with the auditor's objective, but yes, the entity's objective. Reasonable assurance about achievement of entity's objective with regard to 4 points. So this definition may appear to be lengthy to you, but I'll make sure that you are able to understand the definition. Also, you are able to understand how to learn this definition, right? So the first 4 bullets, that is, it is the process designed, implemented, and maintained by those charged with governance, management, or other personnel to provide reasonable assurance about achievement of entity's objective with regard to four things. What are these four things? Reliability of financial reporting, effectiveness and efficiency of operations, safeguarding of assets, compliance with applicable laws and regulations. So, reliability of financial reporting, that is, the financial reports that are getting generated, those are reliable. Effectiveness and efficiency of operations. So, whatever operations are being conducted, so effectiveness, that is the end result is achieved, and efficiency, that the end result is received with minimum cost and the available resources. Safeguarding of assets and compliance with applicable laws and regulations. So if you just look at the 4 points, first is relating to financial reporting, then is the efficiency, uh, effectiveness of operations, then safeguarding of assets, and the compliance with applicable laws and regulations. So you have to, print a picture of this definition in your mind, whereby you will tell yourself that there are four bullets and then four sub points, right? So the four main points is that it is the process designed, implemented, and maintained by those charged with governance, management, or other personnel to provide reasonable assurance about achievement of entities' objective with regard to. So 4 points are there regarding what? Financial reporting. So reliability of financial reporting. Then operations is what? Effectiveness and efficiency of operations, safeguarding of assets, and compliance with applicable laws and regulations. Tell me, are you able to safeguarding of assets, Bani? It means that whatever are the assets of the organization, those are protected. So the physical assets, you can say your machinery or the cash also. So those are safe, right? So see, the overall objective of the entity can be what? That the reports that are getting generated financially, those are reliable, right? Operations are conducted effectively and efficiently, right? Assets are safeguarded. So you can say safeguarded from fire, safeguarded from your theft, anything. And the compliance with the applicable laws and regulations. So for example, let's say it is a bank. So the banking regulations, right? Or let's say it is a factory which employs a number of laborers. So maybe the Workers Act, the Factories Act, right? So compliance with the applicable laws and regulations. So is it clear, Bani? Send in your reply, students. Are you able to understand and learn this definition also? 100% learning will not be there in the class, but at least, yes, understanding how to learn will be clear. Yes, ma'am, understood. Spriti, Mehak is saying. ठीक है, so be with me. As per SA 315, internal control is the process designed, implemented, maintained by those charged with governance, management, and other personnel to provide reasonable assurance about achievement of entities' objective with regard to reliability of financial reporting, effectiveness, efficiency of operations, safeguarding of assets, and compliance with applicable laws and regulations. Is it clear? ठीक है. So we are on page number 3.33, 3.30, right? So when I say that the process which is designed, implemented, and maintained. So this design, implementation and maintenance of the internal control, it will vary with the entity size and complexity. Obviously, it depends upon how complex or what is the size of the organization, right? Now, what are the benefits of understanding the internal control for the auditor? Now comes the auditor into picture, that what are the benefits of understanding? So first of all, see, when you are aware as to what our internal controls have been implemented by the organization, what are internal control maintained by the organization, you will be able to identify as to what can be potential misstatement. Potential is what? Likely, right? Because you know that, okay, with respect to, let's say, sales, the internal controls are very strong. So it is the chances of any misstatement with respect to sales is very less, right? Or let's say with respect to purchases, the internal controls are weak or there are no internal controls. So there are more chances of potential misstatement with respect to purchases, right? Identifying the factors that affect the risk of material misstatement. So whatever are the factors that affect the risk of material misstatement, you will be able to identify that. And based on all these, you will be able to design the nature, timing, extent of further audit procedure. Because ultimately, our purpose is why we are understanding internal control. I told you that we need to understand as to what should be the nature, timing, and extent of our further audit procedures. Okay. Now, as we have seen that there will be what? Reasonable assurance only, right? So this means there are certain limitations of the internal control. So what are those inherent limitations of internal control? So first of all, it says that the internal control only provides what? Reasonable assurance, owing to the inherent limitations of internal control. So what are such limitations? First of all, see, student, human judgment in decision making is involved. So internal control is implemented by, we have seen the management, those such as governance or other personnel. So human judgment is involved and human judgment can be faulty, right? So there can be any, you can say, error in design of the internal control, right? So this becomes one of the inherent limitations of what? Internal control. Then lack of understanding of purpose. So let's say there is an internal control whereby if the sale proceeds with respect to credit sales, if the proceeds are not received within, let's say, 180 days, then an exception report will automatically get generated and it will be forwarded to, let's say, the concerned personnel who is looking after the sales. Now, if that personnel is not aware as to what is the purpose of that exception report, so he is not aware, he'll see his mail, okay, this mail has come, and he may ignore it. Why? Because let's say he's a new personnel and he's not aware as to what is the purpose of such exception reports. So though internal control has been implemented, but there is lack of understanding of that purpose, right? Then collusion among employees. So there can be collusion among the employees. For example, if we take example of that traveling expense only. So let's say the accountant and the accountant who receives the traveling bills and who passes it, who processes those bill. So he, with two or three more employees, he processes the traveling bills of those employees even when the amount is more than 10,000. So collusion among the employees. Or the example that is given in your module is with respect to side agreements. Now what are side agreements? So it basically says that it might happen that, let's say, with respect to any debtor or creditor, you have a main agreement which are shown to everyone, right? And which is in line with the agreements with other debtors, creditors also, right? But the entity may enter into, so this is one of the internal control, that this is the format, these are the terms and conditions that will be there. Now let's say the company enters into a side agreement with the party, with one of the creditors, and which is as such not shown to the auditor. So this is what? Collusion among people, right? So side agreements may be there. And then again, judgment by managements. What internal control is to be implemented? What risk is to be considered? This is all management judgment. So this again becomes what? Limitation of internal control. And last but not the least is what? Limitations in case of small entities. See, one of the internal control that can be implemented is what? Segregation of duty. But tell me, where there are, let's say, two, three people in a very small entity, is segregation of duty possible? Maybe not possible, right? So in case of small entities, internal control may not be fully implemented. For example, segregation of duty. And also students, see, when there is, let's say, the owner is the manager, right? One man army is there, a very small entity is there. He is the owner and he is managing the entire business. So there can be one benefit of this, that he is having access to each and everything and he has a control over each and everything. So nothing will go wrong in this place. But second thing can be, since he has access to each and everything, he may manipulate things, right? So this is the case with respect to a small entity. Let me just take you through this last point from your module also. So it says that we are on page number 3.31, students. Smaller entities often have fewer employees, due to which segregation of duty is not practicable. Segregation of duty is not practicable. However, in small owner managed entity, the owner manager may be able to exercise more effective oversight than in larger entity. This oversight may compensate for generally more limited opportunities for segregation of duty. So this says though segregation of duty is not possible, but that is also not required, because owner and manager, he has an access over all the things, right? On the other hand, the owner manager may be more able to override the controls, because the system of internal control is less structured, right? This is taken into account by the auditor when identifying the risk of material misstatement due to fraud. Is it clear? Is it clear? So these are the various limitations with respect to the internal control. I hope clear to all of you. Please go through this illustration 8. This 7, do it as homework. Illustration number 8. So, Tanvi, do you want me to explain judgment by management point? Right, yes or no? ठीक है, I'll do that. So, first of all, let us read this illustration 8. The team member of auditors of Simple Easy Limited was of the view that understanding the internal control of the company would not help them in any manner in relation to audit procedures to be applied while conducting the audit. So the view of the team member of the auditor is incorrect, because understanding the internal control of company would help the auditor and his team members in designing the nature, timing, extent of audit procedure to be applied while conducting the audit of the company. Is it clear? ठीक है. And with respect to Tanvi's doubt relating to judgment by management. So see, I told you that what nature and extent of controls are to be implemented, and that too with respect to what kind of risk. It depends upon the management judgment, right? So we cannot say that once internal control has been implemented in the organization, everything will be in place. Why? Because management has decided as to what internal control is to be implemented and where it is to be implemented. So it says that in designing implementing controls, management may make judgment on the nature and extent of controls it chooses to implement and the nature and extent of risk it chooses to assume. So you cannot say that since internal control are there, each and everything will be in its place. Is it fine, Tanvi? Is it now understood by you? ठीक है. So these were the various kinds of limitation. Now a very important topic, that is components of internal control. So there are 5 components of internal control, and we will be discussing each component one by one. So the components of internal control are what? Control environment, entities risk assessment process, the information system including the related business processes relevant to financial reporting and communication, the control activities and monitoring of control. Tell me what you understand by the term control environment. Just from the understanding that you have had with respect to this chapter, do not look at the module. Tell me, what do you understand by the term control environment? Send in your replies. So Dhanni is saying the environment of the entity that can be controlled by the entity. Harshada is saying company management, rules, strictness over environment. Yash saying. Rihanna is saying the environment of the entity is in control through the implemented rules and internal control. Others also please reply. Anubhav saying the control system that has been implemented in the business environment. So student, just tell me. So let us just take this traveling bill wala example only. So the internal control is what? That any of the invoice exceeding 10,000, that is to be authorized by two signatories, right? Now tell me, for example, just take a situation whereby there are traveling bills of, so I'm talking about the traveling bills of the employees, right? So let's say there are traveling bill of the MD and the amount is 20,000, 50,000. And whenever such kind of bill comes, so the accountant, he what he does is, with even if there is no signature of any of the signatories, authorized personnel, he passes those bills considering that these are the bills of the higher officials, right? Now tell me, when such thing is happening within an organization, let's say the attendance is to be marked using the biometric device, the thumb impression. But most of the time, the senior officials, what they do, whenever they come late or they leave early, they mark it in the register. They do not use the automated devices. So if these things are happening, the employees, the juniors, or the personnel who are looking as to what the seniors are doing, what will be the impact on those, on the behavior of the junior employees? Will they also try to follow the same thing? Will they also try to override the internal control? Aman is saying yes, Tanvi is saying yes, others also please reply. Anubhav is saying yes, and in fact they'll do worse, right? Ayushi, Sunil, Mohan, they are saying yes. Okay. So the control environment basically is the environment whereby such control is to be exercised, right? So basically, the control environment include the management and the governance function, the attitude, awareness, and action of those charged with governance and management. So I use the term senior officials apically for your easy understanding. So attitude, awareness, and actions. See, attitude, awareness, as well as action. So I told you that without instead of using biometric, they are using what? They are using the register and paper, right? And the pen, right? So this control environment, it sets the tone of organization. It influences the control consciousness of its people. So if you are aware that the seniors are not going to do anything wrong, they are honest, they have their integrity, right? So the others also have a tendency to follow the same path. But where the let's say the staff is aware that the management, the those charged with governance, hana, the upper management, they are also not honest. So such, if such culture is not there, so it might happen that the others will also not follow any internal control. So yes, if I talk in terms of internal control, so in simple words, I'll say that if the management, those charged with governor, are not abiding by the internal control, the same may follow downwards also, right? Is it clear? Is it clear? Yes, they follow the same as their seniors, Mahalakshmi is saying, correct? So, are you able to understand the control environment, the attitude, awareness, and actions of those charged with governance and management, and it sets the tone of organization. That is, it influences the control consciousness of its people, right? The governance and management function. So, this is one topic, that is what is included in control environment, right? Now, auditor should obtain an understanding of the control environment. See, it is the control environment whereby the internal environment controls are working. So, whether this control and environment is such that it will help the internal control to be designed, implemented, and maintained as was desired, right? So, when we say that auditor will obtain an understanding of this control environment, we basically wants that the auditor will evaluate that whether management has created and maintained a culture of honesty and ethical behavior. So, whether management has created such culture, right? Whether management has created a culture and maintained culture of honesty and ethical behavior, or whether the strengths in the control environment is such that it provides the appropriate foundation for the other components of internal control. So see students, what are the other components of internal control? These: the entities, risk assessment process, the information system control activities, monitoring of control. So for example, I'll just explain this point to you. This second point, the strength in control environment which provide appropriate foundation for other components of internal control. So for example, let's say the one of the internal control is such that there are passwords which have been allotted for passing the entry into the system, right? And only the authorized persons are like only few persons are authorized to pass the entries and make the payments or other transactions in the accounting system. Now, if the management has the habit of sharing their passwords with the staff and just ask them that you pass the entry using my password ID. So see, the whether one of the component of internal control is information system, whereby we'll be studying about these passwords and this thing information system. So tell me, will this element be effective if the control environment is not effective? Tell me. So the information system, whether it will be effective when in a situation whereby I've given you an example. So you are saying no, ma'am. Okay. Tone of the organization, say, I mean, the way the others are behaving in the organization, right? Whether they are also moral or not, whether the others are also honest or not, tone of the organization, right? So control environment understanding means that the auditor has to evaluate whether management has created and maintained culture of honesty and ethical behavior, and whether the strength in the control elements is such that it provide appropriate foundation for other components of the internal control. So I've given you example for this point. I hope it is clear to all of you, right? Now, there are various elements of control environment. What are those? So the various elements of control environment are communication and enforcement of integrity and ethical values. I'll discuss these one by one. First of all, let us just have a look as to what are all elements. Commitment to competence, participation by those charged with governance, management's philosophy and operating style, organizational structure, assignment of authority and responsibility, human resource policies and practices. Okay? So we will discuss these one by one. Elements of control environment. So first is communication and enforcement of integrity and ethical values. So to students, we are on page number 3.33 of your module, right? So see, it basically says that the people who create, who administer and monitor the internal control, if they have the integrity and ethical values, then only the controls will be effective. So what is the language that has been used? It says that the effectiveness of controls cannot rise above the integrity and ethical values of people who create, administer, and monitor them. So it simply means that unless and until the people who are themselves creating the internal control or administering or monitoring them, unless and until they follow them, unless and until they have the integrity and the ethical values, the effectiveness of control cannot be guaranteed. Okay? Easy. So it depends upon the integrity and ethical values of the people who create, administer, and monitor them. So see, there should be some standards within the organization, that these are the ethical standard. This is the behavior that is expected, and how the same is communicated to the people, how the same is reinforced in practice that this is actually happening. right? So this is to be seen, right? For example, let's say sales, if any tenders are with respect to any sales that are made to the debtors, so it should not happen that the person who is looking after all the sales, he is charging certain commission from the debtors. So this should not happen. So there should be an environment like that. So that is why there's a point of communication and enforcement of integrity and ethical values. So how the same is communicated, that you will not do all these practice, how the same is enforced in practice, right? So the enforcement of integrity and ethical value includes management action to eliminate or mitigate incentive temptation that might prompt personnel to engage in dishonest, illegal, and unethical act. I gave you this example now, that sales personnel, he should not charge any, commission from the debtors or anything like that. Or let's say any insurance contract is taken for the fixed assets of the organization. So it should not happen that the personnel who is looking after getting the insurance of the assets done, he is also charging his cut in the he's charging certain commission from the insurance company, that we will give you some extra payment, you just give me my cut. So this should not happen. There should be certain behavioral standards, and how they are communicated and how they are reinforced, this forms the part of what element of control environment. Then commitment to competence. So see, if all the persons who are, working, they have the requisite skills and knowledge, chances are there that they will abide by all the rules and regulations. So it basically says that what is the management's consideration for the competence level for a particular job. So matters such as management consideration of competence level for particular jobs and how those levels translate into requisite skills and knowledge, right? Then participation by those charged with governance. Students, in the later chapters, I'll discuss about management and those charged with governance in detail. Right? Basically, just try to understand that, see, in case of small organization, it is not necessary that there is a demarcation of management and those charged with governance, right? However, in case of large organizations, the management is responsible for, you can say, the preparation of the financial reporting or the financial reporting process. And those who are supervising such a process are what those charged with governance, like your audit committee. So you'll be studying about all these in your later chapters. So basically, I've just given you an idea about this. So it basically says that the participation by those charged with governance, whether they are independent of management, what is their experience and stature is what their reputation, the extent of their involvement, the information they receive, and the scrutiny of activities. See, if the management has an idea that we are being overlooked by someone, those charged with governance, they have access to all the information what we are doing, our activities are being scrutinized. So chances are there that management will abide by the internal controls, the ethical values, the integrity, the moral values will stay there, right? Next point is management philosophy and operating style. So what is the management philosophy? Let's say with respect to your selecting any accounting policy or calculating any accounting estimate, right? Or with respect to how they manage any business risk. So this also forms part of your control environment, right? Then the next 2 points are relating to your hierarchy, organizational structure. So if you see, E point is organization structure, and the next point is authority and responsibility. So whether that authority and responsibility relationship, how the reporting is done, how the hierarchy, whether it has been followed or not, right? So the appropriateness of entities organization structure depends upon its size and nature of entity. And what is all included in organization structure? It includes key areas of authority and responsibility, appropriate lines of reporting. So whether that has been followed or not, right? So again, it should not happen that if any, let's say, any bill is to be passed by one junior staff and one senior staff, but the bill has been passed by two junior staffs only, that hierarchy is not been followed, right? So That is also one of the major elements of your control environment. And again, the next is authority and responsibility. That is the authorization hierarchies, whether these are established or not. And last but not the least, human resource policies and practices. See, it is one of the very important pillar of a control environment. Human resource policies and practices. So what are human resource policies and practices? Tell me few human resource policies, practices. Quickly send in your replies. Tell me. Employee benefits, Aman is saying. Others also please reply. Rishita is saying promotion, incentives. Others also please reply. Evaluation, Bani Singh, theek hai. So see, the human resource practice, human resource HR department policies and practices like the recruitment, orientation, training, evaluation, counseling, promotion, compensation. See, it might happen, let's say if the company is not having a good promotion policy, the employees will get frustrated. Why? Let's say they're friends in the other organization where there are good promotion policies. Each employee is promoted every 3 years. There are incentive bonuses which are paid. However, that is not happening in this company. This is going to have an impact on the what ethical values or what moral behavior the employee of this company follow. So that is why recruitment, orientation, training, evaluation, counseling, promotion, compensation, remedial actions, right? So remedial actions is, let's say if any employee has done something wrong, what action is taken? Are the HR policies strict in this regard, or they are lenient in this regard, right? So all these things. Then the training policies, so whether training has been given to the employees or not, right? So whether seminars are conducted, the promotions driven by periodic performance appraisals demonstrates the entity's commitment to advancement of qualified personnel to higher levels of responsibilities. So it will affect how whether the employees are motivated or not, right? And in turn, it will impact their behavior, their moral behavior in the organization, right? So I hope all these points are clear. Communication, enforcement of integrity and ethical values, commitment to competence, participation by those charged with governance, management's philosophy, operating style, organizational structure, assignment of authority and responsibility, and human resource policies and procedures. So you can always get a 3 or 4 mark question on, let's say, human resource policies, procedure, management philosophy, operating, है ना? Communication, enforcement of integrity, ethical values. So an important theoretical question can be this. Is this topic clear? The various elements of control environment. Quickly send in your reply. Now, students, tell me if there is a satisfactory control environment, right? So will this imply that there will never be any fraud in the client organization? Quickly tell me that if there is a satisfactory control environment. So is it 100% surety that there will be no fraud? So Rishita is saying no, Aman is saying no, Prem Kumar, Ayushi are saying no, Priyanka is saying no, which is absolutely correct. So our next topic, which is a very, very important topic, you can always get a 3 mark or 4 mark question here. So existence of students, some music is playing in the background. There is a temple nearby. So are you able to, listen to that voice also? Or my voice is clear? You just write voice, your voice clear. Clear voice. Okay. ठीक है, ठीक है. So existence of satisfactory control environment is not an absolute deterrent. What is meant by deterrent? This is E. Deterrent means hindrance. So it cannot happen that auditor just he obtains an understanding about the control environment and he says that since the control environment is very satisfactory, that means there cannot be any fraud. No, this will not happen, right? So existence of a satisfactory control environment, not an absolute deterrent to fraud. You can always get a question that you are been associated with the team to conduct audit of ABC Limited, and once or after obtaining the understanding of the control environment, you found it satisfactory and thus concluded that there cannot be any fraud. So is that thinking correct? So the answer is no, right? Why? Because see, if let's say all the elements of the control environment that we have studied, the management's attitude is correct, it is exemplary of integrity, ethical values, but it collusion of employees can be there, fraud by employees can be there, right? So this existence of satisfactory control environment, it is a positive factor when the auditor assesses the risk of material misstatement. So yes, it is though it is one of the positive factors. It may help to reduce the risk of fraud. It may help. So the word here is what? May help to reduce, not nullify. It is saying, it is not saying eliminating, it is saying reducing. And the term is what? May. Very, very important keywords, right? But it is not an absolute deterrent to fraud. Deterrent is hindrance. So this cannot happen that control environment is satisfactory. That means there will be no fraud, right? Yes, the vice versa. That is, if there are deficiencies in control environment. So tell me, will auditor ignore this point? If there are deficiencies in control environment, the control environment are not very effective. So is this information important for the auditor? Yes or no? Yes. All of you are saying yes. So yes, if this deficiency in control environment are there, it may undermine the effectiveness of controls, in particular in relation to fraud. ठीक है, so it may undermine, it may reduce the effectiveness of controls, and specifically with respect to what? Your fraud, right? And control environment, this again is very, 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 very important line. Control environment in itself does not prevent or detect and correct material misstatement. ठीक है, it may influence auditor's evaluation of effectiveness of other controls and auditor assessment of risk of material misstatement, right? But it in itself does not prevent or detect or and correct the material misstatement. So with respect to this point, na, deficiencies in control environment, whereby I told you that if there is any deficiency in control environment, auditor should ignore it or should consider it. So there is an example that is given in your module. It basically says that if let's say management fails to commit sufficient resources to address the IT security risk. So the IT risk that are there, for example, whether passwords can be changed, whether someone can hack the system. So this is what control environment, part of control environment as such. So if such is a system, then this point the auditor is going to consider. So it will result in allowing improper changes to be made to computer programs. So auditor cannot ignore this. But yes, opposite of this, that is when the control environment is satisfactory. So it is not an absolute deterrent to fraud. But yes, it will help to reduce the risk of fraud. It acts as a positive factor when auditor assesses the risk of material misstatement. So if you just look at your page number 3.35, last paragraph, in fact, I'll just take you this. So you will see, no, sorry, this point, existence of satisfactory control environment, not an absolute deterrent to fraud. So this is the paragraph form whereby the answer is given in your module. But here are the points with whereby I've just listed the keywords which will help you to prepare this answer. So yes, it is a positive factor when the auditor assesses the risk of material misstatement. It may help to reduce the risk of fraud. However, it is not an absolute deterrent to fraud, but just the opposite of it, that is deficiency in control environment. It may undermine the effectiveness of controls, in particular in relation to fraud. Example is mentioned here. And then it says that C in itself does not prevent or detect and correct material misstatement. It may influence auditors' evaluation of effectiveness of other controls and auditors' assessment of risk of material misstatement. Is it clear, students? Is this topic clear? This is really very, very important topic. So Rishita is saying clear. When we say satisfactory control environment, that is when the auditor obtained the understanding of the control environment, he found that yes, there is an atmosphere of integrity, ethical values, the behaviors, attitude, actions of the management is such that it sets an example for the others also to behave in the same way in the organization, right? Satisfactory, so you can say a good control environment is there. Anubhav, is it clear now? Is it clear, Anubhav? So we have done one of the components of internal control. That is what your control environment. Anubhav, yes. So Anubhav is saying, so even if it is good, it's still not 100% prevention. See, if what is control environment? We are saying the environment whereby the internal control will be implemented in a very simple language, and it includes the attitude, actions, awareness, your actions of the management, those charged with governance. See, if even if it is good, just give me an example. See, they are very honest. The management, those charged with governance. Is it a complete guarantee that all the staff in the organization will be honest? Anubhav, you tell me, is it a guarantee to that? Anubhav, is it a guarantee? No, right? So how can you say so if each and everyone in the organization, the higher the management, those charged with governance, they are following each and every internal control that is there in the organization. So is it a guarantee that there will not be any collusion among the employees? Is there a guarantee that there will be no error in the you can say in the design of the internal control? No, right? Is it clear now, Anubhav? ठीक है. Now, whose doubt is this? Smriti is saying, ma'am, but when internal control is strong, then ROM risk of material misstatement will be low. So that is right. Effectiveness of internal control is high. The risk of material misstatement will be low. Right. So auditor need not perform detailed procedures, right, ma'am? No, this is not right, Smriti. I'll discuss your this doubt in the next chapter when we'll be doing chapter number 4. Abhi nahi, I'm not discussing this right now. Abhi ke liye you just tell me whether it is clear. And with respect to Smriti, your query, if you remember, I told you that only by performing risk assessment procedures, auditor cannot give his opinion. And in fact, we did this in detail that based on the outcome of risk assessment procedures, auditor will decide the nature, timing, extent of his substantive procedure, that is detailed checking. Otherwise, the auditor will just perform risk assessment procedure. He'll just inquire, observe, he'll just inspect, he'll just perform analytical procedure, and he'll give his opinion. So this is not going to happen now, because risk assessment procedures that auditor performs under SA 315, they forms the foundation to the responses to those assessed risk, which auditor gives by performing further audit procedure under SA 330. ठीक है, Smriti? Is it clear? So I'll do one thing. Here we'll take a break of 15 minutes, and after the break, we will be doing the rest of the elements of internal control. Meanwhile, you can send in your query, right? So we'll take a break here. I hope students, you all are back after the break. So we have discussed about one of the components of internal control, which is what your control environment. So the next component of control and of internal control is the entity's risk assessment process. Okay. See, auditor, when he's trying to understand the entity and its environment, so he has to assess the risk of material misstatement, right? So here, after having an understanding about the control environment, the second is entity's risk assessment process. So whether the entity has its own risk assessment process, right? So the auditor shall obtain an understanding of whether the entity has the process for, first of all, identifying the business risks relevant to financial reporting objectives. So we have seen when we were understanding the entity and its environment, understanding about the entity and its environment, we saw objective, business, risk, and strategies. So, whether entity has the process of identifying the risk relevant to financial reporting process, whether the entity has a process of estimating the significance of the risk, right? Then whether the entity has the process of assessing the likelihood of their occurrence, that risk, what is the likelihood of the occurrence of that risk, and whether the entity has a process to decide the actions how to address those risks. So basically, whether the entity has the risk assessment process, identify भी करना है, estimate भी करना है significance, assess भी करना है what is the likelihood, that is the chances of its occurrence, and deciding about how to address those risks, right? So um, so auditor will see whether the above process is appropriate or not. Why? Because if such process is appropriate, it is going to assist the auditor in identifying the risk of material misstatement. See, why we are understanding internal control. If you remember, the name of SA 315 was identifying and assessing the risk of material misstatement through understanding the entity and its environment. And I told you this understanding includes entity, environment, and internal control. So we are understanding internal control so as to identify and assess the risk of material misstatement. So if entity has its process of entity has its risk assessment process, this is going to help the auditor in auditor's risk assessment process. Simple. So it will assist the auditor in identifying the risk of material misstatement, right? And risk can arise due to various factors like new technology. I always give example of mobile company, right? New business model, product, services, changes in operating environment. So auditor needs to consider whether the entity has such risk assessment process. So risk assessment process, though the heading says entities risk assessment process, but the 4 point says identifying, estimating, assessing, and designing about the action also. Is it clear? So first was control environment, second is entities risk assessment process, and the third is information system. So I'll quickly do these points because you will see that these are very general points. Though these are important from your examination point of view, you can always get a 3, like you may get a 3 to 4 mark straightforward question with respect to this point, right? Or you may get a 3-4 mark question here. So all the topics are important, right? But if you just learn them or pick up the keywords after understanding, these are very easy marks, right? So the information system. See, what is meant by information system? The hardware, the software, right? The procedures, the data, the information technology. So all this is what the information system, right? So how the, see the name, the heading says information system, including the related business processes relevant to financial reporting and communication. Financial reporting and communication say related. So auditor shall obtain an understanding of the information system, like the classes of transaction that are significant to the financial statements. So I can say the significant classes of transaction auditor is going to identify. So basically why? Because information system is what? Certain data is been put and you get the results as financial statement. So with respect to this information system, an understanding is required. So first and foremost, the significant classes of transaction. right? Then how the transactions are initiated, recorded, processed, corrected as necessary, transferred to GL and reported in financial statement. So how the transactions, so the journey from transaction to financial statement, how the same has been done, right? The related accounting records, supporting information, specific accounts in the financial statement that are used to initiate, record, process, and report the transactions. So basically, if you can see, this is just talking about the various aspects of the financial reporting, how the financial reports are prepared, right? How the information system captures the events condition that are significant to financial statement. For example, is there any internal control within the organization of how the related party transactions will be recorded, right? The financial reporting process used to prepare the financial statements. So basically, in here we are talking about if a transaction has happened, how it is reflecting in the financial statement. All these process are about, all these points are about that, and the controls surrounding the journal entries. Okay. Then this paragraph says as to what is meant by information system. So physical, hardware, components, software, people, procedures, data, IT, each and everything. Then if you just look at the heading, it says financial reporting and communication. So the last paragraph is about communication. The auditor shall obtain an understanding how the entity communicates the financial reporting roles and responsibilities, right? Whether there are any manuals, any financial reporting manuals, any memoranda. Communication also can be made electronically, orally, or through actions of the management. Clear? Is it clear? So this is with respect to your information system. So first was control environment, then entities risk assessment process, then the information system, including the related business processes relevant to financial reporting and communication. Clear? Then the D part is control activities. These are what components of internal control. So what is meant by control activities? So again, you can always get a 3 or 4 mark question here. So just have a look here. So control activities are the policies and procedures that help to ensure that management directives are carried out. Like your segregation of duty. Or if we say that the CCTVs are installed, this is one of the control activity. Again, segregation of duty, control activity. So various examples of control activities are given in the last paragraph. Control activities relevant to audit generally include policies and procedures relating to performance review. For example, comparison of budgets and actual. This is what one of the control activity. Information processing, controls over checking the arithmetical accuracy of records. Physical controls, controls over physical security of assets. Segregation of duty. So these are the various examples of the control activities, right? And what are control activities? These are policies and procedures that help you ensure that management directives are carried out. So it gives you the example. It says as to what are control activities. And here it says that the auditor shall obtain, and if you will see students, with respect to each component, it starts with the line that the auditor needs to the auditor shall obtain an understanding of the, like here it is, control activities relevant to audit, right? So only those which are relevant to audit, those which are necessary to assess the risk of material misstatement, auditor is going to obtain an understanding about those activities. Okay, is it clear? And the last point is monitoring of control. Now tell me, if the CCTVs are installed, but they are not working, if that traveling bill wala internal control is there that exceeding 10,000, it will be signed by two signatories. So is a monitoring of the control required? Answer is yes. Unless and until the management or those charged with governance, they are going to monitor as to whether that control is, which was implemented, whether it is actually working or not, right? So auditor is going to consider that also. So control activities we have done from the module. Then we have monitoring of controls. So it is the process to assess the effectiveness of control and the performance over time. So whether it is effective or not, whether it has been performed over time with the passage of time. See, it should not happen that traveling bills wala jo internal control tha, that is been taken care of, let's say in the first 3 months of the year and the last 3 months of the year. But in between 6 months, the same is not been followed, right? Why? Because so that any discrepancy, if any, it can be seen on timely basis and remedial action can be taken, right? Now, how can auditor monitor the controls? How can auditor see? He'll obtain an understanding about the monitoring of controls, right? How will he do that? See, it can be through ongoing activities or separate evaluation or a combination of both. What is meant by ongoing activity? For example, let's say any traveling bill is been processed. Auditor will see that ongoing activity as to whether actually this has been signed by two personnel or not. Ongoing activity, right? Or separate evaluation, or you can say in the system, if any entry is to be passed, the password and everything has been there, right? So auditor will see whether actually this is happening, right? Or separate evaluation will be done. For example, let's say if any internal control is there that the depreciations are calculated by the system itself. So auditor may, what he can do, he can ask the management to give him a separate access whereby he can just put in dummy data in order to see whether the system is generating the correct results or not. So separate evaluation or a combination. It includes using external party communications. For example, auditor can always ask the customers about their complaints, the regulator comments, if any, right? In order to see whether the monitoring of control is in place or not, right? So with this, we have covered the 5 components of internal control. We started with discussing the control environment, the entity's risk assessment process, information system, including the related business process relevant to financial reporting and communication, control activities, and monitoring of control. Quickly tell me, are these 5 components clear? And you can always mark these as very important. You can always get any of these as a 3 or 4 mark direct question. Like some situation will be given and you will be required to give a brief about these controls. Smriti, I'll take up your doubt in the next chapter. Now, the doubt that you have mentioned, it pertains to the next chapter. I'll take this up in the next chapter. Tanvi Singh clear, Smriti Singh clear, or others also please reply. Is this topic clear? And I'm repeating it. It is a very important topic. So, in fact, quickly go through test your understanding. 7th. 8th is your homework. Go through 7th one. And meanwhile, any one of you is having any doubt, you can send it. Quickly go through it, students. There are a number of topics which I want to cover today itself. This is a lengthy and an important chapter. Send in your replies. C. Smriti is auditor of a company. As part of audit, she is growing through companies, policies, and practices regarding employee recruitment, training, orientation related matters. She seems to be very much interested in finding out where the company hires best candidate from applicant pool, identify what is she trying to do, how gaining knowledge about this aspect is useful to her as an auditor. So, what is she doing? Quickly send in your replies. So she's trying to obtain an understanding about HR policies and procedures. Where have we read this? This is one of the element of control environment. So this she is obtaining an understanding about the control environment. How will it be helpful for an auditor? It will help the auditor to obtain an understanding about the internal control. Simple. See, why you are saying monitoring the control of the company? Monitoring of controls कहाँ है? Human resource policies and procedures is there, which is one of the element of control environment. Sunil, is it clear? Rishita, is it clear? ठीक है. Now, are all controls relevant to audit? Tell me. See, entity has a number of controls that are implemented. Like I told you, for example, let's say you're conducting the audit of Delhi Metro and you see that there are metal detectors. So are those, relevant for you? Or you are conducting the audit of a hotel and you see that there is a checking at the entrance, there are metal detectors, or let's say various kinds of other internal control. Are these important? Are these relevant to audit? So the organization, see, any entity has a number of objectives. And in order to achieve those objectives, the entity implements various internal controls. Because we have seen the definition of internal control. Ultimately, entity has to achieve its objective, right? Now, the controls can be relating to financial reporting or operations or compliance. It can be relating to financial reporting, operations, or compliance. However, not all these objectives or control are relevant to audit and the auditor's risk assessment, right? So, what are the factors that the auditor will consider in order to determine whether a particular control is relevant or not, right? So, there are, again, this is an important topic. So, factors relevant to the auditor's judgment about whether a control individually or in combination with others is relevant to audit may include such matters as following. So, what all factors auditor is going to consider, right? So, auditor is going to consider the materiality of that internal control. How material important is that internal control? The significance of related risk with respect to audit, right? The size of the entity, the nature of the business entity's business, including its organization and ownership characteristics, the diversity and complexity of entity's operation, applicable legal and regulatory requirements, right? So let's say the organization is a company engaged in, it is having a number of factories, right? So I'm talking about applicable legal and regulatory requirements, right? Now it has one internal control that in the factories, the laborer, the workers that are employed, they should not be of age less than 14 years, right? Now, as such, this is not relevant. But since it has factories act is applicable, Workmen Compensation Act is applicable to the entity. Now, if there are any financial implications that if the company do not, if the factories do not abide by this, that they are employing child labor, they are using child labor, then it may have an impact. It may lead to, let's say, closure of that factory. So now it becomes relevant to the audit. Applicable legal and regulatory requirement. Are you able to understand? Circumstances and applicable component of the internal control. The nature complexity of the system that are part of entities internal control, including use of service organization. Service organization, let's say if the company has outsourced its HR work or its IT work to any, let's say the IT work has been outsourced to IBM. Now it depends that what is the impact of such outsourced work on the auditor's work, right? So the nature complexity of the system that are part of entities internal control, including the use of service organization, and whether and how a specific control individually or in combination with others prevents or detects and corrects a material misstatement. So let's say a particular control is there with respect to sales, right? There is another control with respect to, let's say, debtors, and that debtors control, internal control, is having an impact with respect to credit sales also. So if that internal control with respect to debtors is fine, is working fine, and auditor is satisfied with that, so based on that, auditor will decide the whether the control with respect to the sales is relevant to audit or not, right? Are you able to understand? So materiality, significance of related risk, size of entity, nature of entity's business, including its organization, ownership structure, diversity, complexity of entity's operation, applicable legal and regulatory requirements, circumstances and applicable component of internal control, nature, complexity of system that are part of entity's internal control, including use of service organization, whether and how a specific control individually or in combination with others prevents or detects and corrects material misstatement. Is it clear? Let me just have a look at your queries, if any. Is it clear? Quickly send in your reply, students. Is this topic clear? So we have seen, are all controls relevant? So it basically says that the objectives and control have a direct relationship, and the objectives can be financial reporting के लिए, operations के लिए, compliance. So all controls are not relevant. So what are the factors? So these are the factors that the auditor is going to consider. ठीक है. Now, whether the controls over completeness and accuracy of information important for the auditor? Completeness and accuracy of information. So whether all the information is complete and accurate. So it basically says that the controls over completeness and accuracy of information may be relevant for the auditor if he uses such control in designing the further audit procedures. If he uses such control in deciding the nature, timing, extent of the further audit procedures. Okay? So controls over completeness and accuracy of information, whether all information is complete or not, and whether everything is accurate or not, right? So see, let's say students, when you will be doing analytical procedures in detail, you will see that the auditor may perform reasonableness test, right? Whereby what auditor does is he will just take the selling price and he'll multiply it with the volume of sales, and he'll just see whether the amount that is appearing in the financial statement of sales figure that is appearing in financial statement, whether that is reasonable or not. So see here, the selling price must be accurate. The volume amount must be, volume of the sales must be accurate. So if he's using such information for deciding the nature, timing, extent of his audit procedure, then it may be relevant. Same way, internal control over safeguarding of assets. Safeguarding is protecting of assets. So let's say an example is given. For example, an internal control is there with respect to the disbursement of cash. Now, this is relevant so far as financial reporting is concerned. Consider another internal control with respect to usage of material, internal control that there should not be any excessive use of material in production. So as such, this is not of so much relevance for the auditor vis-a-vis compared to your control over the cash disbursements. Simple. So controls relating to objectives that are not relevant to audit. So a very good example is given here. So it basically says that, see, all controls that are implemented by the client organization, it is not necessary that all controls are relevant to audit. If you remember, I gave you example of CCTV cameras in hotel or the metal detectors. Hana? So these controls as such are not relevant for the auditor. But yes, how salary is processed, whether the attendance is marked using biometric devices, or let's say with respect to, suppose, let's say with respect to sales, if the risk of material misstatement that the auditor has assessed, that with respect to sales it can be high. So whether dummy sales have been shown and shown or not, so those controls can be relevant. So here one example is given with respect to airline system. It says that one control has been implemented by the airlines whereby automatic controls are implemented to maintain the flight schedules. So as such, this control is relevant for the entity, for its operation. But for the auditor as such, it is not relevant. So just give a read to this paragraph as homework. You are going to understand all the above 2-3 paragraphs properly. Okay? Is it clear? Is it clear? Quickly tell me. I've just gone through this topic quickly because these are very easy topics. So the next is nature and extent of understanding of relevant control. Now, having understood as to what are relevant and what are not relevant for audit, now with respect to the relevant controls, what our understanding is required. Okay? So see, students, there is design, implementation and maintenance of control as we have read in the definition of term internal control, right? Now tell me, as an auditor, will you evaluate the design of an internal control first or its implementation? So whether the design is, you can say appropriate or not, you will consider it first, or whether it is implemented properly or not. Tell me. So Aman, Priyanka are correct. They are saying, ma'am, design. Obviously, see, I've told you that we as an auditor, we are not required to give our opinion on the internal control as such, except for one reporting which is required, which we'll be discussing later on. So we are giving our opinion on the financial statement. So why are we understanding the internal control? Because we want to understand as to whether we can rely on the internal control so that we can decide the nature, timing, extent of our audit procedures, substantive audit procedures. Clear? Now, when the auditor is understanding the relevant control, first of all, he will see whether the internal control, just a minute, whether the design of the internal control is capable of effectively preventing or detecting and correcting material misstatement. Whether the design is good or not. Why? Because let's say if auditor finds that a design is not good, the internal control is not effective, why will he see whether it is operating throughout the year or not, right? Because he as such is not required to give his opinion on the financial statement. So if he is not satisfied with the design of the control, what will he decide? He may decide to check the financial statement in detail, and he'll not rely on the internal control, right? So evaluating the design of control involves considering whether the control individually or in combination is capable of effectively preventing or detecting and correcting material misstatement. So you are clear as to what is meant when we say evaluating the design. Implementation of a control means that the control exists and it is been used by the entity and the entity is using it, right? Very important. There is little point in assessing the implementation of a control that is not effective. So the design of the control is considered first, right? So let's say you are like you are looking at a control and you find that it is not effective. The design is such that it will not prevent or detect and correct material misstatement. So why will you see whether it is implemented or whether it has been used by the organization? You as an auditor, you will decide that I will not rely on this internal control. An improperly designed control may represent significant deficiency in internal control, and this is going to have an impact on the auditor's assessment of risk of material misstatement, right? And the next paragraph, which says that what all procedures auditor may perform at risk assessment procedures, we have done these again and again. And a very important line, which I'll be doing with you again in chapter number 4, inquiry alone is not sufficient for such purposes. See, when we did as to what all audit procedures auditor may perform, we saw that the auditor may perform inquiry, observation, inspection, or analytical procedures, right? Now, when the auditor is inquiring the management, see, inquiry alone is not sufficient. You will see that when auditor is performing the actual testing of the financial statement, there also auditor conducts inquiry, right? But see, if inquiry forms a sufficient appropriate audit evidence, ऐसे तो what can happen? Auditor will ask the management, management tell me, are the financial statements giving a true and fair view? Are the balance sheet or the building or the assets, the liabilities, the income expenditure are giving true and fair view? Auditor will inquire, management will respond, auditor will give his opinion. No, that is not going to happen. Along with inquiry, auditor will, let's say, he will observe, he will inspect. So let's say if auditor says that, tell me whether you enter into contracts with your debtors, management says yes. So this is inquiry and a response to inquiry. Now auditor may club this with inspection, that okay, show me the sales contract copy, right? Or let's say whether this building is owned by you, management says owned by the client or the company, management says yes. Okay, I'll inspect the title deed of the building. So inquiry alone is never sufficient. For such purpose, he will have to use any other procedure like observation and inspection. Is it clear? Is it clear? Now, another important topic which is contained in essay 315 is risk that requires special audit consideration. So we have read about a number of risks, right? Now, there are various risks that require auditor special consideration. So, when the auditor is performing the risk assessment and he comes across various risk of material misstatement, so with respect to these risks, these are significant risks whereby the auditor will have to devote his special audit consideration. Special audit consideration means he will have to work more with respect to such kind of risk, right? Without looking at the module, just tell me what according to you can be those risks. So any risk where the auditor identifies that there is a fraud, there can be a fraud, tell me, will it become a significant risk? Will it require auditor's special consideration? Yes or no? Send in a prize. Rishi is saying yes. Where the transactions are complex, subsidiaries are there, mergers, acquisitions are there during the year, tell me whether that requires special audit consideration. Quickly send in your reply. You will be able to, understand all the points on your own, right? So you are saying yes. Also tell me when there are changes in economic or you can say accounting treatments, change of, let's say, accounting standards. So will it also require auditors special consideration? Related party transactions, or where calculations, accounting estimates are there. So will it require auditor specific consideration? Any non-routine kind of transaction is there. Let's say during the year merger acquisition. So merger acquisition is not a routine transaction. Sales purchases are, right? Or let's say a huge machinery is sold. Non-routine kind of transaction. Will it require special auditor consideration? So answer is yes. So just keep in mind the areas which you think that if you come across this area while you are understanding the entity and its environment, you as auditor, you are going to devote your more energy toward that area. That will require the risk that requires special audit consideration. A very simple topic. So what are all those areas? So it says that when in exercising the judgment as to which risks are significant, the auditor shall consider at least the following. So what is he going to consider? Is fraud, whether the risk is relating to a risk of fraud? If yes, more consideration. Are this, is that risk relating to recent significant economic, accounting or other development? I gave you changed accounting standard, right? Changes in regulatory environment from, let's say, like any from accounting standards to, let's say, any other applicable financial reporting framework. If there is a change, that will apply. Complexity of transaction, I gave you example of mergers and acquisition. Mergers and acquisitions. ठीक है. Related party transactions, degree of subjectivity, measurement and uncertainty. I gave you example of calculation of accounting estimates. ठीक है. Then your unusual transaction like scrap sale, right? So will that require auditor significant consideration? Yes. Now, how to identify significant risk? This is the next topic. Very simple topics. I'll take you quickly through these two topics. So see, significant risk can be the risk which are non-routine transactions. So risk associated with non-routine transaction. They can be unusual due to size, nature, or another factor can be they occur infrequently. So these are what non-routine transactions. Or judgmental matters, that is development of accounting estimates or measurement uncertainty. So if you are asked that as an auditor, how will you identify significant risk? So you will write that whether it is a non-routine transaction or whether judgmental matters. Okay? And students, the risk of material misstatement is always high with respect to non-routine transaction. Why? Because see, with respect to non-routine transaction, let's say mergers and acquisitions, or let's say a scrap sale is there. So management intervention will be there. Sales purchases हैं उसमें तो whatever is the system, whatever are the internal controls, automatically processing will be done, routine kind of transactions. But the non-routine kind of transaction, the unusual one, management intervention will be there. Also, manual intervention will be there. Because since it is unusual transaction, non-routine transaction, systems would not have been developed with respect to such kind of transaction. Also, complex calculations will be required, right? And it will be difficult for the entity to implement any effective control. Why? Because a single transaction is there. Implementing an internal control with respect to that only one transaction might not be, very cost effective for the organization. So the risk of material misstatement is always high. Same way, the risk of material misstatement is higher with respect to significant judgmental matters. So wherever management's judgment is involved, for example, let's say any accounting principle is there which has different interpretations. So different companies are interpreting it differently, or where any complex calculations like your fair value calculations are involved. So again, these are judgmental matters, like how much provision for doubtful debts is to be made. So it all depends upon management judgment. So these are what significant uh, matters whereby the risk of material misstatement is always high. So we have covered this topic. Risk that auditor requires special audit consideration, that requires auditors special consideration, then identifying the significant risk, then risk of material misstatement greater for significant non-routine transaction, and risk of material misstatement greater for the significant judgmental matters. So quickly tell me, students, is it clear? Are these topics clear? These are very simple and related topics, so we have done them quickly. And in fact, not quickly, I'm taking you through each and every page of your module. So I hope everything is clear. Tanvi is saying yes. Others also please reply. Ayushi is saying clear. Mahalakshmi, Rishita, Smriti, Priyanka, everyone saying clear. Prem saying clear. Chalo, that's good. And students, today we have covered till page number 3.43, and I'll try to cover more pages. And today, though, you should definitely go through the module once the class is over. Then only these things, who all are writing that it is clear, it will be more clear to you. Otherwise, it will get clear of your mind also. Because small topics are there and interrelated topics are there. And we have discussed a number of, practical examples side by side. So you will be able to recall them. You will be able to memorize the keywords or everything that we have discussed if and only if you give the module a reading today itself. Okay? So now the next is evaluation of internal control system. So we have understood the various internal control components, right? Now is the time to evaluate the internal control system. See this benefits of internal control system, that what will be the benefits once the auditor evaluates the internal control system. Read it as a homework because these are very easy. See whether the controls adequately safeguard the assets, whether adequate internal control system is there or not, how reliable the reports are. Very simple, right? And then based on that, the extent depth of examination that needs to be carried out, what appropriate audit technique is to be carried, whether control is weak or not, and any suggestions. So very simple. Do it as homework, do this illustration as homework, and this also as homework. Formulate a audit program after understanding internal control. So this is also your homework, but I'll just brief it to you as to what is contained here. So see students, in chapter number 2, we have understood about audit program, if you remember. And if you remember, there also we have discussed that when the auditor is formulating, he's constructing an audit program, he should consider the internal control of the organization. So let's say the auditor is deciding the internal control with respect to the audit program with respect to sales, as to what will be the audit program, what will be the extent of checking of the sales invoices, and the various audit procedures, and the extent of checking, whether it will be on sample basis, what will be the criteria. Now, if auditor does not, consider the internal control, then though he if he ignores internal control, then though he will have to check each and everything in detail, which is not possible owing to inherent limitations of audit. So if you remember, we have seen in chapter number 2, extent of checking. So whereby I told you that 5% or 10% or based on the value auditor may decide. So when he's writing, okay, I'll check only 5% of the transaction which are less than 1 lakh. Why he's writing only 5%? Because he tends to rely on the internal control, of which he has taken an understanding when he was evaluating the or he was identifying and assessing the risk of material misstatement under SA 315. So this topic, which is given here, it basically says that when the auditor has to formulate an audit program, he should formulate it after understanding an internal control. Otherwise, the audit program is going to become what? Unwieldy. What is meant by unwieldy? It basically means, just a minute. Unwieldy, it basically means bulky. Because see, if you are not relying on the audit program, फिर तो sorry, if you're not relying on the internal control, that means you are checking 100% of the sales transaction. So your audit program is going to be bulky. Bulky means that then there will be checking of all the transaction. So consider the internal control. After obtaining an understanding of internal control, formulate an audit program. Is it clear? Is this topic clear? So I'll do one thing with respect to evaluation of internal control, the methods. I'll just brief you all the methods, because discussing all 4 methods, I think, won't be possible. But before starting with this topic, paragraph number 6.2 given on page number 3.46, I really want all of you to please reply whether you have understood till where we have covered. Rishita, I'll be uploading the PPT, which is a summary of your entire chapter, third. But as I always say, that please make your own notes, start highlighting the keywords or preparing notes in your module or wherever you like, and consider your module as the base for your preparation, understanding everything. Okay? The summaries are beautifully given in your Saransh also, which are there on the BOS Knowledge Portal. So make use of that also. But yes, your basic understanding, your learning will be done from the module itself. So Rishita is saying okay, others are also saying it is clear. Okay. Now we are saying again and again that the auditor needs to understand the internal control. So see, when the auditor has to understand the internal control, for that he will have to obtain certain information, right information from the right people. Once he gathers such information, so let's say with respect to, let's say any of the, the company is using a technical software for accounting, that is SAP. Now there must be some manual or some guidelines as to how that system works, right? But when the auditor has to evaluate the entire internal control, which is relevant to audit, he will have to obtain a number of information, a number of like a lot of data will be required or information from right people. So now is the topic, which means how the auditor is going to accumulate that data. So there are four methods. That is, he may use narrative record. Okay, let me just share the module. So see, it says that to facilitate the accumulation of information necessary for proper review and evaluation of internal control, to facilitate the accumulation of information. So we are accumulating information. Accumulating is gathering the information necessary for proper review and evaluation of internal control. The auditor can use one of the following to help him to know, assimilate the system and evaluate the same. Assimilate is what? Understand. So I'm not able to write here, but this is what understand, right? So it can be narrative record, checklist, internal control questionnaire, or flowchart. Internal control questionnaire, popularly known as what? ICQ, right? So I'll just brief you about all these four things. So first is what? Narrative record. So what is meant by narrative? So it means description of something, story. You narrate a story now. So it basically says that after testing and observing the internal control, auditor will maintain a narrative record of how the internal control is working. So it is a complete and exhaustive description of the system as found in operation by the auditor. So maybe by ongoing, maybe by by separate evaluation, auditor will see as to how the this internal control is working. For example, let's say one of the internal control is physical inventory count. So auditor attends the physical inventory count, he observes it, right? And then he prepares a narrative record, like the management comes, the employees come, they just count the bags. Then the physical inventory count simultaneously happen at the warehouses also, at the factory also. So this is what a narration. But see, if you have to narrate a story, you should be aware about it now. So that is why it says that actual testing and observation are necessary before such a record can be developed. है ना, तभी तो आप कोई स्टोरी बता पाओगे ना. But there are and see, is it possible to narrate the internal control with respect of very large organization? Answer is no, right? So you cannot just write essays and essays with respect to the internal control. So it is suited whereby it is a small business or where there are no formal control system as such, right? So informal control systems are there it is practical. What are the disadvantages? See, to understand the system, understanding the system is not possible. So it is not always possible that you will be able to understand the entire system and then mention it in a story. To identify the weakness or gaps in the system is not possible, because see, suppose an entire story is written about the system, so is it highlighting any gap in the or any weakness in the system? It is like a story only, right? And to incorporate changes arising on account of reshuffling of manpower, that is also not possible. So changes also cannot be made, right? So this is the narrative record. The advantages or the advantages are given in the form as to where it is suitable and the disadvantages. Simple. So basically you are writing after testing and observing the entire internal control as to what it is exactly, right? Then is the checklist. So what is checklist? If you remember in chapter number 2, we discussed about checklist. So basically the audit staff, they are given a checklist as to, for example, the example which is shown here. So checklist instructions are given that, let's say when you are checking the purchases, so whether these are done or not. So are tenders scored before placing order? Are the purchases made on the basis of written order? Is the purchase order form standardized? Are purchase order forms pre-numbered? So there will be option of yes or no, and then the initials of the person who is doing it. So like this will be done. Okay? So this is a series of instruction questions which a member of the auditing staff, very, very important, member of the auditing staff will hit. Must follow or answer. When he completes the instruction, he initials the space against the instruction. Answers to the checklist are usually yes, no, or not applicable, right? And this is a kind of on-job requirement, and instructions are framed having regard to the desired elements of the control. So whatever kind of controls are implemented, a checklist will be given. The audit staff will keep on checking it and will keep on ticking it and put his initial. And after once this has been done, the complete checklist is studied by the principal manager or the senior to ascertain the existence of internal control and evaluate its implementation and efficiency. Simple. Is it simple? Then is ICQ, internal control questionnaire. It is also important. So here also I marked this thing important, that checklist is filled by, just a minute. Checklist is filled by the audit staff, right? However, in case of internal control questionnaire is what? So again, this is the way to accumulate the information with respect to internal control. But here, ICQ is usually issued to the client, and the client is requested to get it filled by the concerned executive and employees by giving replies in yes, no, or not applicable along with the explanatory notes. So what is a ICQ? So the questions will be framed the way we have seen for your checklist. But here, the ICQ is given to the client, that you get it filled by the concerned employee. So for example, for purchases, see, questions will be same, like are purchases centralized, are purchases made only to suppliers, is a list approved suppliers maintained for this purpose, but who will be filling it? Client. So again, a yes means a favorable answer, no means not favorable answer, and the explanation is to be given. So this is the difference between checklist and ICQ. Simple. And the last one, so you can just have a look. These are the examples that for inventories, how the questions will be framed. With respect to creditors, how it will be framed. With respect to purchases, how it will be framed. Then the next one is flowchart. As you all are aware, you have been preparing flowcharts since your 11th, 12th. So what are flowcharts? So flowcharts, these are the graphic presentation of each part of company system of internal control. So graphic representation, like this happens, then this happens, then things happen in the form of graph. So this is going to give you a bird's eye view, right? And it minimizes the narrative explanation, thereby achieves the consideration or presentation not possible in any other form. Why? Because it gives you a bird's eye view of the system, right? Right. And if any suggestion is to be given, then it can, or any improvement, it can be easily spotted. Why? Because after reading and the flowchart, you are able to see, okay, there is a lag, or let's say here internal control is appearing to be weak, right? So this will help the auditor to understand and evaluate the internal control in the correct perspective, right? Is it clear? So these are the various kinds of way to evaluate the internal control and basically to accumulate the data. Narrative record, your checklist, internal control questionnaire, and the flowchart. I hope these are clear to you. Just go through this illustration number 11 quickly. Quickly go through this illustration number 11. Ayushi, you are correct. Representation through graph. So it says that in order to evaluate the internal control of Your and My Limited, a team member of auditors used a method according to which number of questions relating to internal control of the company were required to be answered by the employees of the company. After obtaining the answers, there was a discussion relating to those answers between the team members and the employees of the company for a clear picture. What is the method? So it says that the internal control of the company were required to be answered by the employees of the company. So what is it? Quickly send in a reply. Do not look at the answers. Quickly send in your replies. Is it ICQ or checklist? So Anubhav, Smriti, you are correct. Others also please reply. Aman correct. Mehak correct. Yash correct. Shifa correct. Rihana correct. Prem correct. Sunil, check your answer. Tanvi, check your answer. It says that it is to be answered by the employees of the company. So it is what? Internal control questionnaire. Checklist is when the audit staff, they fill the answers, yes or no, and they put their initials. Tanvi, Sunil, is it clear? Tanvi, is it clear? Sunil, is it clear? Right? Same in the next question. Just read illustration number 12th also. Healthy and useful is this for the purpose of evaluating the internal control. The team members used a method according to which the whole description of internal control was operating was to be recorded. Whole description was to be recorded. What is the method? Do not look at the answers. Try to answer it on your own. What method is this? Narrative. Correct. So students, is it clear to you? So I'll do one thing for today's session. I'll stop here, but there is one doubt of Rishita. I'll just answer to that doubt query, and then we'll end the session for today. So Rishita is saying that sampling risk, page number 3.8, second line and second line, right? So let me just take you through page number 3.8. Sampling risk. So sampling risk, see, sampling risk is the risk that, so, what is sample? So if let's say there are lakhs of transactions, sales transaction, so auditor, instead of checking 100% sales transaction, he decides that he will be taking 10% as the sample of the sales transaction and check them in detail. And whatever result he gets for those 10% sales transaction, he'll proportionate that on the entire population. That if there is a mistake of, let's say, 1 rupee in 1,000 transaction, then how much will be the mistake in 1 lakh transaction, right? Now, the second line, the sampling risk means that the risk that the auditor's conclusion based on the sample may be different from the conclusion if the entire population was subject to the same audit procedure. So based on his procedures that he applied on the sample, those results which he gets are different that he would have obtained if he would have applied the audit procedure to the entire population. What does that mean? It means that the sample that he chose, it was not a representative of the entire population. Because let's say the sample that he chose, let's say he selected it on random basis. Now, there are certain related party transactions which was there in the entire 1 lakh transaction, but those transactions were not selected in that sample. Or let's say there were various sales which were exceeding rupees 10 lakhs and other amount that in the total of 1 lakh transaction was, let's say, 1 lakh, less than 1 lakh. The sample he selected, it was consisting of the transaction less than 1 lakh only. So the sales which were more than 5 lakh or 10 lakh were not selected. So the sample that is selected, it is not representing the entire population. Okay? So, Rishita, is your doubt clear now? And otherwise, 530 essay, essay 530, when we will be doing, I'll repeat it again there also. Not representative of the population, na? Means that if he would have applied those audit procedure on the entire population, he would have concluded something else, right? So it is not representing the entire population. Is it clear, Rishita, now? And the meaning of term assertion, as you were saying, assertion means the representations that the management makes in the financial statement. So it can be with respect to building, it can be that this building exists. This is owned by the client organization. The valuation is as per the applicable financial reporting framework. So these are the various assertions that the management make, and we as auditors, we check these assertions with respect to the items that are appearing in the financial statement. So whose doubt is this? Rishita, I have discussed about assertion in the last session also in detail, and in chapter number 4 5 also we'll be discussing about assertion in detail. So you can if you want to just have an understanding about the term assertion, you may refer to the last session also, or in chapter number 4 and 5 when it is going to come in detail, right? As of now, I've given you a very brief idea about the term assertion. Is it clear now? So student, if you have any query, please send in your queries. Otherwise, uh, till page number, I'll just tell you, till page number 3.51 or 52, we have covered the chapter in entirety except for essay 320, which I'll be taking up in the next session. And as I always ask you that before coming for the next session, you must go through the entire study till where we have studied, along with chapter number 2 and 1 also. A quick look at both the chapters. And as Karuna ma'am in the last session from Board of Studies told you that you must come prepared for the next session. So you can just have a look at the essay 320 and essay 330 that is given in your module. I'll be taking up those topics in the next session. So that's it from my side.
Okay. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, students, for your participation. The next class will be on 28th. The timings will be same, 2:30 p.m. to 5:30 p.m. So as ma'am told, before coming to the next class, please revise your chapter number 3 covered till today. Okay. So thank you. See you on Wednesday. Thank you, ma'am.
Okay, thank you, Ankita. Thank you, students, for your time. Bye, and please study before coming for the next session. Okay, thank. Yes, yes, Divya. Thank you.
Recording stopped.